All right, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to special election special on the Perrysburg School Levy. We've got some folks here. We hope we have a good conversation with. Of course, we have Superintendent of Perrysburg Schools, Tom Hostler. Good morning, Tom. Or good afternoon. Usually in the morning. Good evening, Tom.
Yeah.
And then we've got Chris Heathcote. Chris, hello.
Hi there.
How are you doing, man?
Doing great. How are you?
Chris is a no vote on the levy, and we've also got Dan Champ here, who's a yes vote on the levy, but made Mr. Hostler made him know that this is not going to be easy just because he's a yes vote. You have to earn it, Tom. Good. Hello, how you doing? How you doing, Dan?
Oh, very good. Thanks for having me.
Good. I want to start, Tom, with thank you guys so much for coming in and giving up some of your afternoon here on this Thursday. I wanted to start with one of the questions that I think that came up a lot in Messenger and things like that, and that is, why has the levy come up? Why did we bring it in last minute? Why people say it was introduced last minute?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the format, and certainly it's great to be here and to be able to have a dialogue because I think it's so important. I don't know the folks that say that. I'm not sure. There's a lot of noise out in the community, out in the state, in the nation. So I can see where this wouldn't be something that folks would see coming. But we have a levy that was passed in 2019, and that levy was set to expire 5 years later. It was a 5-year levy, and now that is 2024. So we have a levy that's expiring. And that levy results in $13.5 million coming into the district. So the bulk of this levy that is on the ballot is $13.5 million of that is dollars that are already being paid that are part of the expiring levy. So the Board of Education had a couple options. Do we let it expire? And that's 17% of our operating budget. Or do we replace it? Do we renew it? So coming up last minute, it really, in 2019, it was a 5-year levy. It was set to expire 5 years later. That's December 31st. So this is kind of what happened. So it's not like all of a sudden we need to be on the ballot. We knew this levy's expiring. It's 17% of our budget, and there were many conversations at the board level starting back in the spring about how do we want to proceed.
You and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and one of the main points I think that you made was per pupil versus the state. We were around, I think it was $1,000 per pupil, and our administrative staff, the administrators, there are less administrators per pupil versus the state. Some people wanted to say that, well, okay, but we need to be comparing ourselves to like districts as opposed to a state average. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's always interesting because, on the one hand, we've talked about that because people have said, you guys are top heavy. You have way too many administrators. And then when you show the data and compare it to the state average, and it shows, it tells a very different story. And then to come back and say, well, you need to pick the districts that are over here or over here. So we're happy to compare ourselves to any group, any subgroup. But I think the reason that we were talking about it in the first place was, there's a lot of cars in the parking lot at central office, so you have a lot of administrators. And then when you actually show the numbers, then it's like, well, that's true, but what about this group or that group? And we do compare ourselves, and we're in line with where those districts are.
I was going to ask you, do you know if you are in line with the you're in the top 7 or 8% of the state in schools? Would you say, would you confidently say that you're the top 7 to 8%, that per pupil cost and the administrative cost is in line with that as well?
So this is what gets us into trouble, because you said peers, and the top 7%, they're not all our peers. And Ottawa Hills, for example, one of the top 7% districts, like Perrysburg, Ottawa Hills, the entire school district, kindergarten through 12th grade at Ottawa Hills, is smaller than Perrysburg High School. In fact, half the school districts in Ohio are smaller than Perrysburg High School. Those really aren't our peers. So if you're comparing against the top 7%, then you're looking at districts that are smaller, some very few that are larger, and so now you're looking at that data point. if you're saying peer groups, now you're looking at districts that might not be in the top 7%, but they have a socioeconomic makeup of our community. They have a similar number of students, the type of district, suburban, and then you would look at those. So when you look at the top 7%, and I don't have that broken down and committed to memory, we continue to perform very well because, other districts spend a lot more than we do, and high-performing districts, there's more that do than don't.
Are you confident that in your peer districts that you are in line with
Yes.
what the others are doing?
Yes.
You would say that confidently.
Yes. Yeah.
Chris and Dan, you guys just jump in wherever you want to. You don't have to wait for me. But is that Chris? Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, like I was going to say is that there is the peer groups, the common groups of schools that we have around there, but I think it's more of, okay, we know that we're at the average, but is that average where we really should be? Just because everyone else is at this level, it shouldn't be a justification for us to spend at that level as well. We really need to look at, here's all the positions we have, what are they doing, what is the results of it, is it really truly benefiting the district, or can we maybe consolidate some of those jobs? If you look within the comparable school districts, you do have a range of, some are a little bit higher, some are a little bit lower, if we're in the middle, but if we shave off a couple to get to that lower end, that may help appease a lot of the people that say, we keep adding administrators instead of looking at doing what we have, or maybe even reducing it where we can.
Right. And I think, getting back to that statement, we keep adding administrators. So
Which is a common theme on Facebook,
Right,
so it's great for
right.
you to have the opportunity
Yeah.
to answer it.
So what can you share with me what your, give some examples of adding those administrators, because I know we've talked about that and answered those questions. So in terms of, we keep adding, what is your perception of the additional administration that we've added?
Well, this is one that wasn't really my main sticking point, so I don't know. I haven't looked into it all that well, but it was, looking. I think it was comparable groups would be like Avon Lake, maybe it was Dublin. There's a few others, Sylvania. If you look through it, just at the numbers basis, some are, according to like the CUP report, are operating, more more students per administrator, so a little bit more a better ratio there.
So I understand that, but when we're talking about, and I think this is, Andrew, you said this fills up your inbox with this kind of thing. So we're talking about adding administrators, and I can tell you exactly how many we've added in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years. I can tell you what positions that they've been added to, and the reasons behind those. That's different than saying, okay, and we're not at the average with how much we spend per pupil. We're $1,000 below the average, and we're our ratio for administration is 1 to 54. The state average is 1 administrator for every 119. Now we're in our peer groups, and we're talking about, a few students here, a few students there, and some were better off in that capacity, and some were not. So I think it's a little bit tricky when we get into, you guys have added administrators, and it's like, well, we're really not talking about that, because we're talking about how we compare to the state, 609 districts, and then how we compare to, 17 peers from all across the state. And so we've added over 50 teachers in the last 5 years. And in that same time period, we've added 3 administrative positions, 1 in operations. And we have a subgroup of students that the number of really intensive students continues to increase, students with special needs and students who are dealing with different types of mental health issues. We've added administration there, and that's a compliance issue in some cases. And then an assistant principal at the high school, which is, again, a pretty big operation, and the requirements that we have to fulfill there. But when you think about adding 54 students, that's like an elementary school and a half. Could you have an elementary school and a half without any administration? And in that 54, you're going to have kids who are on IEPs and that kind of a thing. So We can talk stats and data, and we can talk about the actual things that are happening.
I do have another question, and then I don't think that Chris or Dan would take it personal, but it's best if you talk into the microphone and not look at them. It's just for so people can hear you. No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Someone did ask. Perrysburg administration is paid $20,000 more than the state average per the CUP report. How would you answer that? How would you justify that?
Yeah, I think that if I'll kind of do what they just did and say, if you look at our peers and where do we rank there. The other thing about that is in the CUP report, it says that our administrators are paid on average $7,000 less than the average in Perrysburg as a resident. So you start getting into these numbers, and you start picking. And here's the thing: we have a levy that is expiring on December 31st, and it's $13.5 million. If that levy fails, we will not collect on that for an entire year. And I think I think Chris would agree with that. That's a fact. And so we've added, on average, about 10 new teachers to the district in the last 5 years with the last levy. So why do we need that increase? And when you're having enrollment continue to grow, that's what those dollars are going for. So we can get into the weeds about administration, but the fact of the matter is that's why we're on the ballot.
Does it have? Is it hard? Is that part of the confusion that there's so many ways to look at it? Like you said, you can look at the state average, you can look at your peers, you can look at like districts. I mean, there's just so many different ways to look at the numbers, which I think everyone kind of cherry picks what's best for their argument. And it makes it hard to have a conversation because you're like, well, per average it's this. Well, yeah, but per student it's this. Yeah, but per district it's this. It's hard to have it. The facts can be moved. I mean, it's almost like moving facts when they're all facts, but it makes it hard to have a substantive discussion with when you factor that in. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think so taking a step back and saying, okay, as a school system, there are certain aspects that maybe I agree with or don't agree with. And they have a program, or I had somebody at an event who said and really was upset that we have a bowling team. We've had a bowling team longer than I've been here, but was like, that is something that shouldn't be, and was really upset about that. And the cost of that bowling team, all total in the number of students it serves, compared to a $76 million a year budget, is pretty small. But that issue is something that caused her to speak out at an event and really criticize the district. And so here's the point: what are the results? What are the results that we are getting? Because we're not hearing that we don't think Perrysburg Schools is achieving at a high level. We don't hear they're doing a terrific job. Our home values continue to be something that drives this area and makes it a desirable community. We don't hear that. So now we're talking about, which peer group do we want to compare ourselves to?
Well, and then aren't you at a slippery slope then if you say, well, why do we have a bowling team? Well, why do we have a rugby team? Well, why do we have? And then you start picking off teams. And is that fair to the kids that love bowling or the kids that love rugby or it just, you start to get down that slope, and then it becomes a weird situation. Another person asked, there was a charge that you are classifying administrators differently from maybe you were classifying people other than administrators to try to stay under that per pupil level. What would you say to that charge?
No. We have a number of administrators. You can count what those are and put them in, and so I'm not sure.
Is there a gray area? Like you said, hey, maybe this person, we're not going to classify them as an administrator. Is there a gray area, or is it pretty cut and dry what an administrator is and what I don't know, a teacher is or another staff member?
Yeah, I can't speak for what other districts do. If we have somebody who is in food service, for example, and that person is, in charge of our food service, we classify that person as an administrator. They do evaluations, they do, purchasing and those kinds of things. When we get into, other districts, I don't know if they classify that person as an administrator or not, but we do.
Okay.
So,
and then if someone wants to get into the conversation, you could text us at 4, and the number streaming at the bottom, There's a ticker 419-345-3375. You can call it 419-464-9292, or you can leave a comment right there on the where you're watching the live feed at. Molly asks, why didn't the district follow the state's recommended changes after the 2019 audit was performed? A levy was passed, and ESSER COVID funds were granted, and more staff and programs were added, and no adjustments were made. What would you say to that?
So the recommendation is so it might take a little bit to kind of connect the dots with this. So the district passed a levy in 2014, and the levy was to build a new building, and that was HPI, so we're very grateful for that. And Toledo Public is on the ballot today, in November 5th, and they have a bond issue, so new construction, renovations, and then they also have an operational levy, and that's called a combo. And so a lot of districts will choose to do a combo, so it's operation and construction. It's a little bit of, here's what it's going to cost to build the building, and here's what we think we're going to need to operate that building, because building HPI, we're adding on to our staff. We're changing programming by doing that. We're taking an entire 5th grade out of out of 4 buildings, and then a 6th grade out of another. And we have a new cafeteria staff, new custodial staff. We're pulling people in, and those require additional costs, additional dollars. So the Board of Education at that time said, we're going to go for a bond issue. We've set aside enough funds in reserve where we're going to operate and get a true sense of what that building takes to operate in 2017 when it opens. And then we're going to go to the voters with what we need at that point in time. So in 2014, the levy passed. It opened in 2017. And in 2019, it said, okay, this is what it costs for us to open.
After you've had 2 years of...
Right, so that gives us. The other thing that happened between when that levy was passed and when we opened, we added over almost 700 students in that window. So that is enough students to fill more. I mean, that's larger than Fort Meigs. It's larger than Woodland. I mean, so that's a lot. So we've added staff to keep up with that growth. And the state then had a funding formula which capped how much the district should get. So the state had a formula and said, okay, you guys should receive X, but we're going to give you Y. And that difference was $3.5 million that year that the state said you should get this, and we were a capped district. So all those factors contributed to us going on the ballot and saying, okay, we need these funds now. Because if we don't get those funds with the state and how much the state's not giving us when the formula says it should, the additional students and the commitment to add staff, we need these funds now, and we really started to deplete our cash balance. So we went to the voters to do that. In the meantime, the auditor of state selected Perrysburg as to receive a performance audit. Their whole goal was to make sure that the schools had a balanced budget. So it wasn't like looking at us and saying, you have too many this and too many that. It was, you should cut this, this, and this to get a balanced budget. And it was no new staff, hiring over 4 years. It was reducing over, almost 100 positions. And in that report, which I recommend people to take a look at, it said things like, if you make these reductions with the growth that you're experiencing, you will fall below what we would normally recommend within a year, within 2 years. And when it came to a lot of the administration costs and other costs that people thought there was a lot they were really waiting for that, we were in line with what the auditors saw.
All right, Mr. Hostler, I have a question. So, first question, do we have individual budgets for each of the schools so we know what they should be, what the costs are for each of the schools? I find it a little hard that you saying, well, we have HBI, but we have to run it for 2 years to figure out what that cost should be. You should know how many teachers you're going to have, the custodial costs, new building. You should know what all the electrical and utility costs will be. So how is it that we had to wait, 2 years to figure out what those costs should have been?
Well, again, it was 2014 when we were on the ballot, and what I said was in 2014 we didn't have that information. We had projections. We didn't have a building built, and so we didn't have a combo issue like Toledo Public is doing now. So that is what we.
So you're saying in 2014 you had to guess when the school opened what the opening would be. In 2019 you had 2 years, then you knew exactly where your projections versus what the actual was.
Right.
Real quick on this other one, I'll get right back to you, Dan. I promise. The 2019 though, would you agree to this question that says that none of the recommendations were implemented in 2019, and you say there were mitigating factors, but how do you go from nothing implemented to everything implemented? It seems like there's someplace in the middle. Did you ignore the whole thing, or did something get implemented where Molly is wrong?
Yeah, so I think, and I didn't get a chance to finish. So
I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I think one of the things that when we actually got into the audit, I think it was really important for us to remember that the goal of this audit was to get us to a balanced budget, because we were projecting a deficit. And so the performance audit began to say things. So the first thing that it said, and you can find this on page 7, is it said that noteworthy accomplishments. So the auditor said that the district strategic planning and how it aligns the budget with how it looks forward is something that we found to be very beneficial, and they wanted to note that. So that was a positive, because we hear quite a bit that you guys never plan. This was the performance audit was to have a district that would operate with $7 million less. So that was the goal. So to do that, it recommended reducing staff by 98.5 positions. So if we would have done what the state recommended, we would have cut 98 positions. That is more than the combined staff at pick 2 of our elementary buildings. So if we would have taken the recommendations, we would have laid off staff that we would have closed 2 elementary buildings. So that was the goal. The thing that it recommended, getting into cutting 11 custodians. So this was months before COVID, but cutting 11 custodians, that's what they said, to get down to that dollar amount. And here's the thing, and one of the things the auditor said on page 29 of the report, it said, although these options would eliminate the deficit in each year of the forecast, it could drastically change the service levels within the district. So when auditors say things like drastically, that's unusual, because they're pretty, and I don't want to offend any auditors, and Dan and Chris, I don't know if you're auditors or not, but using words like drastically is uncommon. So they're acknowledging that this is going to be and here, at the end of the 4 years, cutting 98 positions, doing things that they would have said, like, okay, you're going to be well below your peer average if you do these recommendations with the growth that you have. At the end of the 4 years, the amount of money we would have had in our cash reserve was $1,987. We would have been right back with the auditor coming back in to do another one. So this plan, if implemented, would have decimated the district drastically, in the words of the auditors.
Right.
And at the end of the 4 years, we would have no new teachers, 98 staff members less, and we would have had $1,987 in our cash reserve. So why would we have implemented that plan?
So, then the answer. So Molly's question is, why did you implement any of the plan in 2019? Your answer to that is, so unforeseen circumstances like a new school and then COVID hitting, and those are a couple of the reasons that why the plan didn't get implemented. Is that fair to say?
It was recommendations to balance our budget,
right,
minus $7 million. So it wasn't a recommendation to get, more efficient. It was to get to zero, get to $1,987. It wasn't to let's make these recommendations because there's a little bit of fat here, a little bit of fat there. This was, you guys need to have a balanced book without $7 million, and by the way, here's what you need to do that. That was the plan. It wasn't to get lean, it was to get to zero. And after 4 years of the plan, we would have had less than $2,000
right,
That's not even enough to cover one of our payrolls.
One of the I think I hear you, Chris, and I'll let you jump in a second. But one of the biggest no issues is they say you got to cut something. You're just asking and asking and asking, and there is no cutting at all. Is there anything that you feel is there any fat that can be trimmed to say, hey, look, we made this effort, we trimmed this stuff, in good faith? Is there anything that can be done, or would you say you're running at peak efficiency?
So we continue to make reductions. We continue to look at ways that we can save dollars, and whether it is replacing the lighting system in all of our schools with LED lighting, more efficient energy. We've converted our buses, a majority of our buses, to propane, and so that is something that has reduced our operating costs. We share an administrator with Anthony Wayne. We do some shared busing and transportation with Rossford. We contract out when it makes sense for us, and we have some services where we do that. We also don't contract out, and we save those dollars. So, for example, spraying, fertilizing, we got our staff trained to do those things, so we're not hiring a company to do that. We're keeping those costs inside. So you don't get to a place where you're spending less than the state average by overspending. I mean, that's something, again, let's talk about data, and it is, that is one of the important data points is that.
And that's the thing of social media is, oh, well, you're not cutting anything. Well, now when you have a back and forth discussion, you can say, hey, these are actual concrete things that we have done to keep costs down, and to cut some here and there. We're talking to Tom Hostler on the Perrysburg School Levy. We're also here with Chris Heathcott, who's a no vote on the levy. We have Dan Champ here, who's a yes vote on the levy.
And Andrew, let me just interrupt for 1 second. So the other thing that is that I think gets lost in this is what I said earlier, which is we're a growing district. I mean, we've continued to add students every year. So when you are controlling costs, which we do, and at the same time, again, we're averaging 10 new teachers a year. That's a pretty significant financial commitment, and we have to do that. That's where those dollars are being spent is in that classroom. So, so it's challenging, because if we were not growing, and we had a stagnant community that was just the same number of kids or declining enrollment, then I think it's let's talk about that. But at the same time, we're you guys are spending more every year. Well, we're adding more kids every year. So that's a real challenge.
If you want to comment, 419-345-3375 is the number to text, 419-345-3375. If you want to call, it's 419-464-9292, or you can just leave a comment where you're watching it. Dan, you look like you're chomping at the bit there, brother. Go ahead.
Yeah, so...
any follow-ups you guys want to give Tom, or if you want a new question, go ahead.
No, just bringing it back to the original levy. You've got two failed bond issues, right? This year and last year. And now you're asking for, I think the existing levy was $13 million over 5 years, 13.5, about $54 million. This is a ratcheting levy ask, which is going to go up to, I think, close to, I want to say 160, maybe I'm off on that number. But, I worry about the opportunity cost. You're coming at your community with a big ask. Is there something that you could have done sooner in the prior couple years? Maybe not prioritize those bond issues, maybe ask for a lower amount that could have been less risky for folks to vote on.
Yeah. So I think it's important to just a couple things. So the 2019 levy was a 5-year incremental levy. So that incremental levy began with a specific dollar amount, and then the Board of Education in 2019 set a dollar amount it wanted to collect each year. So it wasn't a constant $13 million every year of that levy. It actually built up to that, which is a positive for taxpayers, because as we're growing each of those years, we're asking for the dollars to come in at the time we need it. So that dollar amount increased each year, and the auditor in 2019 said, based on today's values in our community, it is going to take 6 mills to reach that final dollar amount. So people in 2019 were looking at that saying, wow, that's a lot. And we said, hey, this incremental levy, as more people move into the community, that amount that is needed to collect that specific dollar amount decreases. So if 10 people go out for pizza and the bill is $100, $10 a pizza, I'm looking at a pizza expert so you can critique me, and then 4 people show up at the table before the pizzas come out, and the bill comes, now that bill is being shared by 14 people, not 10. That's how an incremental levy works. So the actual amount of millage that was needed over those 5 years was less than 2 mills. And so this incremental levy is going to basically act the same way that 1 in 5 years did. So it's projected to grow $2 million a year starting in the second year. And so the $13.5 million, taxpayers are already paying that amount. So to say the 164 million or whatever that number was, that is what this levy's asking for, is a little bit disingenuous. I'm not calling you disingenuous, but it is, you're already paying that amount. So what we're really talking about is that $2 million over what you're paying today, because you're already paying on that $13.5 million a year. And in year 1, there's no change in taxes. In year 2, when this goes on the books for $4.20 per 100,000, we're also paying off the high school, the bond issue there. So that's $5.34 per $100,000 is coming off. So in year 2, you've got this coming on, which is projected at 420, and it's going to be less because people are coming for pizza, right? Mm-hmm. And we have $5.35 per 100,000 coming off. So that's what we're really talking about here. To say 164,000, it's like if you earn $50,000 a year, you get a 5% raise a year. That doesn't mean at the end of that 5 years you have $500,000. You're talking about that increment each year, and so
Chris, what say you to all this? You're the no guy. Come on,
Yeah.
what do you got here?
Yeah, so Tom, before you got here, I was just telling everyone that, so I'm an engineer, so I love the numbers, I love digging into it. I'm also a continuous improvement person, so I'm constantly looking for how can we save money, how can we make improvements, how can we be more efficient. So everyone says, dig into the numbers, look into the numbers, look what the numbers say. So I have. So looking at your projections on how much the true levy costs will go down due to growth within the district for this upcoming levy, it's looking like we're expecting the growth to be about 7% a year, which seems a bit excessive. So if we're looking, I know the district's larger than just Perrysburg, but that would be the equivalent of adding 700 new homes in Perrysburg every single year, and basically almost increasing the size of Perrysburg by 60% by the end of this levy. Most of that decrease in that millage is coming from increasing the property values. The real true incoming growth is probably closer to 2%, which would be one of the 100 new, more bigger, more expensive homes. So I mean, while we're saying the last levy you were only paying 60% of it or 69% of it when it comes back in, the real value that people were paying is probably closer to 85% to 90. True, it's lower than what was originally projected, but it's not decreasing as much as a lot of people are trying to imply it will be.
So, yeah, and I didn't connect the dots on that, Chris. So I'm sorry, but so are you including the is that number applied to the whole 164 number, or is it just the incremental cost?
The incremental.
Over
It's looking at here's what the maximum 420 is going up, but because of growth, we're saying it's going to be 380, then 360.
Right.
So that keeps going down. So that implies that the growth into the district is increasing at 7%.
Chris, are you saying that the past growth hasn't been 7% and that 7% is too high for them to be projecting? Is that what you're asking?
Correct. The real growth into the district, the new houses, the new building, that's what actually absorbs it and lowers the cost. So just because your house increases 10% and your millage that you pay drops 10%, you're still really paying the same amount, even though your millage dropped.
Does that make sense?
Well, if your millage drops, you're paying less. I mean, the millage drives.
You're paying less per 100,000, but if your total home value goes up 10%, then you're, instead of just paying 100, say you're paying on 100,000, Now your home goes up 10%, you're paying 110,000 on it. So even though your millage dropped 10%, the total output is the same.
Yeah, I mean, I would disagree with that because House Bill 920 is a law in Ohio which drives, the amount of, what millage rates, are applied to
Right.
collect that dollar amount.
Yeah,
and
you're-
it has to decrease, and it continues to decrease.
Yeah, your millage decreases, but
Right.
it decreases because of the new growth that's coming into your district. And, if it weren't for House Bill 920, just in Perrysburg alone, that averaged a 25% increase, that would be basically adding a 10 mil levy on top of it just because of the increase in home values. So that's the reason why we have this when we have high inflation. It's not to punish growing districts.
But that's the unintended consequence. I think we can agree to that, because if you're a growing district and your income is fixed, the only way that you can go out and raise additional revenue is ask voters for more because of exactly what you talked about.
So
Let's flip the
So you think it would be fair that if we didn't have that, with this 25% increase in home values that Perrysburg experienced, that we should pay, the equivalent of this expiring levy just in 1 year?
I think it's unfair for districts like Perrysburg to have to continue to go back to voters because they aren't able to collect any growth. So when you have 100 homes move into Perrysburg, the amount we collect on those mills that are subject to House Bill 920, we don't collect $1 more on those.
Right, and I
And
understand
that causes us to go back out to voters. That's why there's been over 12,000 levies in Ohio since 1976 because of that factor. It's not a Perrysburg thing; it's a state of the Ohio
thing. That's
thing.
a state thing.
But let me flip that back. So is it fair to say that the homeowner is going to pay $4.20 per 100,000 over the life of this 8-year levy, that it won't decrease?
Oh, I'm acknowledging it's going to decrease.
Right.
But I'm just saying, while the projections show that per 100,000, it's going to drop down to 280 or whatever it is. But if it drops 15%, but your house value increases 10%, it's only what you're paying is only decreasing 5% because of that growth.
And I think the number that you're using, it also factors in the debt mills that are retiring at the high school. So if I'm thinking about what chart you're looking at, we've always been very upfront in explaining to folks that this is what the auditor says, so this is the amount that's on the ballot. But we want you to understand how this levy will work. So we had several tables walking them through. If this happens, if we grow at the rate we are today, this is what you can expect it to do. And we get lots of questions. Well, if you take off the high school bond issue, what will that be to my final bill? So that last chart on the very far right that you're referring is taking people through, here's what the auditor, if nothing changes, this is what it'll be. And then if we grow like we did last year, or the last 5 years, this is what it'll be. And then if you factor in the high school coming off, that's what it'll be. So the high school, that number you're quoting includes, if we're thinking about the same chart, includes that bond issue coming off and explaining the impact, because people ask that, and that's why it's there.
And there is some confusion. How many students did we add this year over last?
I think that we were, I don't have that in front of me right here, so we've been growing about 2% a year, a little up some years, a little bit down some years, and we're probably around 1%, 1.5% from last September to this September.
I forgot my calculator on that, but
Okay.
I do have a question real quick. Hi, we have a phone call. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, hey Thomas, Larry Levy. How you doing?
Good, Larry.
Hey, my question is, Tom, and I posted something on there, but I posted it incorrectly. I used 264. But when I look at the operating levy, the incremental levy that we just paid off, it was 5 years, $54 million. Now the schools are asking for $164 million over the next 8 years. I don't understand how you got to that number since your budgets don't even go out that far. And then on top of that, you added this $2 million per year, which cumulative comes up to be $56 million. So when you add the $13.5 million for 8 years, you got $108 million, and then you add the 56. you're at 164 million. I don't understand how that number could be determined without going through a process of developing a budget, projecting out. I know your 5-year forecast only goes out to 2028. The bond levy goes out, or not the bond levy, but the operating levy goes out through 2031. So I would be really interested to find out how those numbers were developed. The second thing I'd like to know is, I hear people say, well, you're really paying the 13.5 now. Well, we only did that for 1 year. And that was this year, that was the last year of the 5-year incremental levy. So for people to say, well, we were already paying it and assume that we're going to go ahead and pay that for the next 8 years, it's kind of difficult to grasp. So can you just tell me how these numbers are developed and, where they came from? And one other thought is that
hold on, Larry. Let's start with those. I'll keep you on the phone if you want to jump in, but because we'll get too far ahead because you've got a lot of information here. Hang on, okay? Don't go anywhere. All right. So go ahead. The first one is the 164 million total. Go ahead and address that, Tom, that Larry brought up.
Yeah, I'm not clear exactly because he said we pay off the levy after 5 years. So we have had a growing enrollment over the last 5 years. We've added teachers to keep up with that growth. And we have, so those kids are here in the district. Those teachers are working with those students in the district. The dollars that we spent to hire those teachers, hire that staff, that's part of our budget today. So we're using those funds that I mentioned. In 5 years, over the life of this levy, we've added 54 teachers. So I guess the question I would have back is, so if we're okay with that money going away, are we okay with
losing
50 teachers?
Right.
And I'd like to hear maybe a response on that from the folks, because a no vote is really taking those dollars out of the budget.
Right.
So what is the plan
So like you said, it's
fill that?
It's money that's already there.
Right.
And so your no vote is getting rid of 50 people that live in this community and teach your kids. Larry or Chris, what say you?
Well, I look at it,
Hold on, Larry. I'm going to let Chris go, and then you jump in, Larry.
So we have this levy, it's basically the renewal and then the incremental of 2% or 2 million increase every single year. Okay, I can understand the district's growing, but one of the things I have an issue with is that the expenses are growing even faster than that. Expenses, overall spending that the school district is going up over 5 million a year. From even the own treasurer's report shows wage and benefits are increasing at 8% a year. And that's much higher than the 2% student growth. That's much higher than inflation over the long term there. So I think that the issue that I have, and the issue that a lot of people I've talked with, this goes all the way back to 2019, where the big issue was, we had this levy coming up and people were saying, are we going to pass this levy? And they say, if we do, because the district was in need of this money because we would have been negative, we said, we want you to, we'll pass it, but we want to have input on, making some effective cost reductions within the district. And we had those committees. I was on one of those committees. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and it was like 2 meetings done, never heard anything from it again. But I think that's the real thing is, you need this levy, but the biggest issue is, it's going, your spending is going up 5 million a year, but you're only getting an extra 2 million. From the 5-year forecast, it's looking at, we say we don't want to draw down our savings reserve, but in the second year of this levy, we'll start to draw that down as our spending keeps going up.
Yeah, it's spending. So you're saying spending is not in check with the levy where if it passes where it's at.
Correct. I think a lot of people had said, we mentioned, we talked about, the financial audit, but, maybe we do want to have an efficiency audit coming in to say, are we doing the best everywhere? Are we implementing the best practices that, other districts that may be performing better in certain financial areas, are they, can we learn anything from them? Can we maybe combine roles that other districts have? What is it that other districts are doing that we can maybe learn to make ourselves a little bit more efficient? We talk about, if the levy fails, we need to cut off $6 million off the bat. It's going to be $13.5 million for the year. Maybe at these points, maybe we have to look at all options. Not just say certain things are off the table. Even if we cut every non-wage and benefit portion of the budget, that would still only be about $11 million. So we'd still be short. The only way you can actually balance the budget if it fails would be to look at the wage and benefits. And I'm not saying fire people or lay people off or reduce their pay, but a simple, instead of an 8% increase that we've been spending on wage and benefits, if we reduce that down to 3%, that's $3 to $4 million right there in savings.
So, Tom, if you can answer his question directly, and then I'm going to throw it back to you, Chris, because, again, you're going to become superintendent here, and what do you do with those 54 jobs? But go ahead and answer his first.
Yeah, I think the 8%, so the 8% is being kind of portrayed as, the existing staff that we have, the cost to maintain that existing staff is going up 8%. What that 8% includes is the additional staff that we're adding. If we're adding 10 teachers a year, and that's not even including the bus drivers that we hope to get, or the aides, instructional aides that go with students, all those extra things are part of that 8%. So if we could control costs, and it's kind of like this situation where, you have a family of 4, and people say to you, you know what, I have a family of 4, costs are going up, and school district, let's pretend you're a family of 4, you're a neighbor, and you need to control your costs, and that's fine. Except let's go the next distance, because I think this is part of being what's left out here is the fact that my family of 4 is a school district. There's a knock on the door, you open the door, and there's a baby on the front porch. And you have to take that baby in. You have no choice.
So now you're a family of 5.
So now we're a family of 5, and then another month later, knock on the door, and there's another baby there. And by the way, you're spending $1,000 less per child to raise your family than everyone else on the block. At some point, you cannot turn out the lights or not pay your electric bill. So part of that growth is in response to that growing family. That family is going to spend more on groceries and food and clothing. So that's the dilemma that we're in, and that gets left out of the equation is that the fact that we're a growing district. If we were a family of 4, we weren't growing anymore, and you're spending more, you need to tighten your belts. I get that. Mm-hmm. And as a parent, I've been involved in having to make decisions in my own family about tightening belts. And we've always done it in a way that has not hurt the kids. But the $13.5 million belt tightening that people are talking about, that means the next child that gets left on the doorstep, and we know that child is coming, we understand that there is going to be, pain, it's going to be painful for those kids, just like that family. I mean, you're going to have to cut back somewhere. And so that increase that you're talking about, if we were a stagnant district and we're not adding, then let's have that conversation. But we're getting those kids dropped off on our doorstep.
I love this kind of analogy here. I love analogies too as an engineer. As I moved into this district as a family of 6, and then our family of 6 did grow to a family of 8. And then with all their friends, occasionally it seemed like we had a family of 12. And, I can't just go to the boss and ask, hey, I got more expenses. I need more money. I understand the district's growing and we have it. And I understand that, that does include a lot of additional positions in there. But a lot of it is tied directly to just wage increases that are contractual. Lots of districts have the same thing. Lots of cities have the same thing. And I've seen, plenty of examples. We got to look at, I know it's going to be the tough decision to kind of go to the teachers union, the other staff's union, all of them, and say, here's the situation we're in. What can we do here? Can we freeze these step increases or freeze the wages, or maybe we reduce it down a little bit, and so they get a little something to show that we do care. But wouldn't that be better to do it across the board, save $4 million, than to say we need to lay off 56 people?
Because I think something that Chris is saying, and that I think a lot of people in the community are saying, like I think, Tom, you're running efficiently, and you guys are in a good place, and I think that you feel on your end that you can justify all the money that's spent, and you think that your fiscal responsibility, that you've got that under control. Chris is saying, throw us a bone. Just say, hey, we're going to cut this. Just show that you're making an effort to not just ask us for money, and like you said, not do any belt tightening in the school, because we haven't heard about any belt tightening. And I think that might appease the other side a little bit, even if you say, there's going to be some difficult choices, but maybe that would appease the other side a little bit. What say you to that, Tom?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll jump back to the analogy that Chris had. So the difference between your family expanding and the family of 4 at the school district is, I'm assuming, and I don't want to start a fight or anything or any issues, but you as a family made that choice to expand your family. I'm assuming so.
Right.
Yeah.
We as a family have no control over the kids that are dropped off on our porch, and I think that's something.
And you don't know if
that's
it's going to be
important.
4 or going to be 10.
Right, and if you
You have to
drive
take 'em
around
all.
Perrysburg, and you can see, those where those doorstep, the path to the doorstep.
So, going to this, I understand that, does the school district have kind of a financial breakdown of it and say, okay, if we get so many new students, here's how we need to address it. It's not going to be one teacher per one new student kind of a ratio. It'd be, okay, for every 30 kids we get in, we need to add one teacher. Every 160 we eventually get in, maybe that is, a couple, aides in the classroom. Maybe it's a different issue with the lunchroom. Do we have a breakout of that so we can, forecast and say, okay, with this growth here, here's where we should be. And then we can look out 6 years and say, okay, if we keep on with our, 1.8%, 2% growth, here's about where we should be, and here's where our costs should be.
So we do that every day. I mean, that's our business. Those projections, looking into the crystal ball, looking at the developable land in the community, that's what we do every single day. And when you look at the increases that our staff has gotten over the last, 50 years, 25 years, the last several years have been the lowest average amount that the staff has gotten. So we continue to strive. We've made our healthcare costs, tightening our belts. Our healthcare costs the increases have been significantly below what the national average has been in terms of healthcare costs, because we've done some innovative programming to do those things.
I mean, that'd be another one to look at too. I know, the talk is, if you're in the kind of the civil service jobs, you take the lower pay for the better benefits. Overall, healthcare costs have gone up across the board. People are paying significantly more per month for just their premiums as well as their deductibles. Perrysburg School District, across the board, we're self-insured, but we still have very low premiums for the people on those plans, and we have very low deductibles. Have we looked at, if we increase that a little bit there, that could save another $1 million or so within the district.
Let me ask you this, Chris. Do you think teachers are overpaid?
I think teachers,
in general,
I think teachers are very well compensated with their total package that they have. I think, unfortunately, the starting level that teachers come into is significantly below where it is.
But don't you think that if you ask them to pay more for their benefits or pay more for the benefit package or more deductible or anything, that is basically a pay decrease. And I'm surprised, because I've never heard anyone say, man, those teachers are over. Like, you have to deal with your 6 kids. Imagine having to deal with 30. Like, no, thank you. You can't pay me enough. It surprised me to hear you say that you think that that they're compensated fairly, and that some sort of increase in deductible, it was a decrease in pay, that you would be okay with that, Chris.
Well, I think it's kind of the same thing with asking the people in the district pay an increased levy. You're basically losing some of your disposable income. Overall, like I said, the teacher pay range in Perrysburg goes from about $43,000 starting out, and I think caps out around $104,000. So, and the average is about $74,000. So, I mean, I think overall for the average in Perrysburg, they're in over the 70th percentile of earnings for the whole country. And then you add in, their extra benefits that they do have, where if they're paying, I'm not sure what the current health insurance premium is, but it's $125, somewhere around there, for a family. while other families in the city are probably paying closer to 400 or 500 a month for their health insurance.
Yeah, I don't know about those numbers, Chris, but if schools were the kind of, salary and benefit pack, and so the top salary, do you recall where that tops out?
Where it tops out in Perrysburg?
Yeah. How many years does it take to get there?
Yeah, well, that would be about like year 28.
Yeah, well, it actually goes beyond 30, our salary schedule.
Yeah.
So it takes, I don't want people to understand that, boy, you start here and then pretty soon you're there.
Right,
It
you wanna
takes a whole
career.
30 years.
Oh, it takes half your life.
But here's the thing: we have an opening now in the high school for math or for different kinds of positions. We have single-digit applicants. And that's not, and Perrysburg is a desirable place to be. So again, if we start getting into,
Higher deductibles.
the education of, that is such a lucrative proposition, then there's a significant shortage. And again, we're kind of moving away from the fact that there's an election on Tuesday. I don't know if people knew that. And if that fails, what impact does that have on us recruiting, quality teachers?
But I think it's important. It's an important path to go down because this is something that a public information wouldn't know. If you're getting single digit applicants for opening positions, then you are potentially talking about a decrease in the down the line. You're talking about a decrease in the quality of education. So now you say your premiums are going to be higher, or you're going to be maybe cut down the salaries a little bit. Well, if you're already in that position, which maybe people don't know, you don't want. Everyone agrees that school is one of the most important things when it comes to property value. When it comes to someone looking at a community, the school is one of the most important things. So to hear something like that is like, oh, that's kind of could be a red flag down the. I know you're pulling it out early, but that could be a red flag down the line. Am I right?
Well,
yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Per the CUP report,
Go ahead, Dan.
we actually spend less than similar districts on average on teacher salaries, and we have a lower percentage of teachers with over 10 years of experience. So we actually have a higher percentage of teachers with under 10 years of experience. So I'm not sure that teacher salary and benefits is where
This is where the chopping block.
where those cost centers are, but I am curious to hear, where are those cost centers going forward that you see as the biggest opportunities for sort of that belt tightening?
Well, the salaries and staff that you quoted there, that is our biggest expense. So that is the greatest expense that we have as a district, and it's balancing those cost opportunities with packages and trying to be competitive at the same time. And so that's what we do. The amount that we've given out as raises has been below the cost of living. And I would stack up what we've been able to achieve through cooperation with our unions compared to your business or whatever businesses you're in. I'd be happy to check that against it. So those opportunities are there. Like I mentioned before, we share services where it's possible, and we have examples of that using the county and their staff. The aides, which are over 80 employees that we have in the district, are not Perrysburg employees. We contract that out. So that's an example of us finding ways to try to keep our expenses down so that we can continue to provide the services. And people don't know that. And we make those staff members feel welcomed. But we have 80 staff members that walk every day that are being paid through a different agency. Those are examples of ways that we've belt tightened over the years instead of bringing those folks on board.
Larry, you've been on hold very patiently. Did you get some of your questions answered sufficiently?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things, I guess, that I would like to address that Tom had said, even in addition to what I had put in there. Number one, and Tom and I have discussed this many, many times, Perrysburg School says, well, we're $1,000 below the state average. However, Perrysburg Schools has 9% economically disadvantaged kids versus a state average of, I think on the CUP report, was 43%. Tom and I had this discussion years ago. Tom sent an email down to the Ohio Department of Education, and they said yes. The Ohio Department of Education said that they factor that into that number. So what they do is, so the 1,000 less becomes 100 less, okay? Because we have such fewer economically disadvantaged kids. So that's one point. The second point.
Let me stop. I just want to clarify.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom. And
So I don't. In due respect, Larry, I don't think that you're explaining it correctly. So the CUP report is the actual dollars spent divided by the number of students. It's everything that's factored in. What you're talking about is that on the state report card, they do a weighted factor for those students and come up with a different number. And so it's not the actual number, it is what the state feels those students should be weighted. And if you can tell me what that weight is right now, that would be great, because I don't know what that is. And I don't know if the state changes that, but it is creating a weight that they feel is something to factor. Also, those students do receive additional money per pupil with the old formula and the new formula. And that number is going to increase over time. And those are real dollars. Those are not weighted numbers. That's what the state report card shows. But the CUP report is the actuals.
Well, let me.
I understand what you're saying, Tom. I'm not questioning, that you're being, disingenuous by saying $1,000 less. What I'm saying is that when you factor in those percentages, because everyone I've talked to always said that for economically disadvantaged kids, it costs more to educate those kids. So that's why the state on the state report card factors that in to balance it more out with the state. Because if they're at 43% and we're at 9%, obviously that's a big advantage for us. But the other thing I did want to mention is that, I hear oftentimes that, well, we're going to have the bond levy fall off and we get to, offset this number against this number. Those two don't have anything to do with each other. The bond levy is falling off because the taxpayers paid for the school. So that levy would fall off irregardless of any new levy that's going on. So what troubles me is when I see somebody say, well, the new levy is going to cost you $10, but don't forget, the
five's coming off.
School bonds are coming off, and therefore it's really only costing you $5. Well, they have nothing to do with each other.
But Larry, let me ask real quick, Larry, before you go, let me ask you this. So let's say Tom says it's $1,000 less per student that we pay on state average. Let's say you say, Larry, it's $100 less, or even if it's even, or even if it's $100 ahead. That would still mean spending is in line with where it should be. Can we agree on that? Because I'm not a smart guy. I'm the dumbest one in the room by far, because there's some really smart guys in here. And I would say, just hearing that, saying, okay, even if it was even, we're still, with the performance that we're getting and the money we're spending, it's in line. And we can't argue with success of the district. Where am I wrong, Larry?
Okay, how I would answer that is, we're spending money as if we have 43% economically disadvantaged kids, because that's what the state says the state average is. Okay, so that's why we're on an even keel there. If it's $100 or $200 or whatever. Well, that what that tells me is, well, yeah, we're spending the money as if we have that level of economically disadvantaged kids.
But what you're not understanding, hold on, Larry. But what you're not understanding is taking your numbers, and we're only $100 less. So you're saying that taking the 43% disadvantage versus the 9% disadvantage for Perrysburg, Tom's saying it's 1,000. You're saying it's 100. If you take that into consideration, taking your numbers, you're still under per student. So what is the complaint?
The complaint is I'm not saying it's a complaint.
Uh-huh.
I'm just saying we should be further under the state average.
All right. Thank you, Larry.
We don't have the level. We shouldn't have to have the level of teachers and counselors and all the other things that go along with economically disadvantaged kids that we have. And that's all I'm saying on that one.
Okay.
That's just that.
All right. Thank you. Go ahead. You want to address that, Tom? Thank you, Larry. You want to address that?
I'm not sure where to go. So,
all right.
But I think
Dan wants to jump in. Go ahead, Dan.
I think to really summarize it, it's you have people on fixed incomes in your district. I mean, what do you say to someone who says, I just can't? I cannot afford this. You know, it's not in my pocketbook.
Yeah, and I think that the answer to that person is then don't vote for the levy. You need to do what's best for you and what you feel in your heart.
Well,
and at the end of the day, that's it.
That doesn't really help them out if the levy passes and then they're out of luck.
So, the one thing here in Perrysburg is, and I think about this, but back in the 1950s, Perrysburg, it's coming out of World War II. There's a lot of things that are happening, building the country, and people coming back from the war. And in that time, Perrysburg passed not one bond issue, but 2 bond issues and levies to build new schools and to operate. And that was a reach and a sacrifice for the residents, at that time. And today we're still benefiting as a school district from the sacrifice that those folks made. Somebody made that decision. There has been other generations where it has been tough for those taxpayers. And we're very fortunate that voters here have had pride in their schools, and the schools have been something that has driven and made Perrysburg what it is today. And they've invested in that. And your home values reflect that. And that's an investment. And so we're grateful that those generations have made those commitments. So the people that are there, if they've had kids that have graduated and gone through the district and they're long gone, somebody did sacrifice. Somebody who was on a fixed income made a difference and invested to invest in their child's education. And that's what makes our community special. If, knock on wood,
or Formica, whatever this is.
Yeah, and I've never had the fire department called for me at my home. Never. Why in the world am I paying taxes on the fire department? Don't need it. You get no benefit, no value from it. But as a citizen, as part of a community, you want those services because the neighbor down the street, they're there quite a bit. It's so that's
I had this conversation with my Cintas guy, who from opened a new restaurant. I'm talking to the Cintas guy. He's a Perrysburg guy, and he said something about how with the IEPs and things like that, how we have to have that. And he goes, my kid doesn't need that, but he said, but having those additional resources for the kids that do need it, it's just the right thing to do. And that was coming from a citizen. He said it's just the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Chris, let me ask you. You're superintendent. $13 million is coming in. It's going to go away after November or January or December, whenever it goes away. What are you doing with those 54? What are you doing with those 54 teachers?
Well, as I said earlier, I would try to go every path possible where we don't have to lay off the teachers and we won't impact the students. You have to look at every single option. Maybe we're asking people in the district to sacrifice a little bit more, but that's the same thing we're asking them when we're asking them to pass a levy. I think, after the 2 bond levies failed, I think it should have been a wake-up call to say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't choose the largest option, the longest option that we have for this levy. Maybe just a straight renewal of the current one, and we wouldn't be in this issue, would have passed. I think maybe even a slightly smaller incremental for the 5 years. At least, that would sustain everything. But I think the biggest issue that people had, going all the way back to 2019 is, they said, spending, we think we still need to get a better control on it because it's growing faster than the revenue, faster than what the city can sustain, and it's going to be harder and harder to pass. I think if this levy passes, the next one, by the time it gets to the end, I think you're going to end up having to pass a levy that's 2.5 times the size of where that one ends just to meet our spending goals. Even with this, if we project out all the current expenses, we're basically drawing down our savings reserve in half by the end of this levy. So we're not actually in a good, stable, reasonable, financial path here.
So let me interrupt, Chris, for a moment. So you said that if we renewed the levy or pass one, that we would sustain things, and then you just pointed out that with this levy, we're not sustaining things. So we know going in. So one is, that there's a little bit of contradiction there because, if we renewed the levy, we would have to make reductions. We would have to stop hiring new staff. We'd have to do the things to balance the budget, and that involves reduction. So as superintendent, Chris, I didn't hear a plan. Like, what do you do? Because
Right.
you're either going to have to make those reductions, and those are not adding new teachers while we're growing. It is reducing programming, and then you're going to have voters saying, you just passed a levy, and now you're making layoffs and reductions, and then at some point, again, it's that family of 4 that's now a family of 6. You're going to have to do something differently because you can't turn kids away. And with this levy, and I think that's an important point, is this is going to require belt tightening to get to the end of this. So those are the things that we know we're doing and we're taking out when we leave here. But to say that, if you would have just renewed this, it would be sustaining it, 2 years from now, and you've looked at the numbers, 2 years from now, we're either having to make some reductions, significant reductions, or the board then is going to have to go to voters and say, we need a little bit more. And the voters are going to say, you were just here 2 years ago, get lost.
Well, I think that's the big thing is, our expending is growing faster than this levy and all that. That's why we need.
And that's because of, partially, we're adding more students.
Partially
And we
more
can't
students,
control that.
It's still growing much faster than the new students and much faster than the inflation. Now, if I were superintendent and we knew after the 2 levies failed, we need to do something, we need to secure at least a portion of the income that we have. We had options out there for a smaller increase for a shorter period of time. Then, like you said, if you're a growing family, maybe we have to look at other sources of revenue or income coming in. Maybe that's when we look at and say, okay, we have a 0.5% income levy. Maybe we convert that to the earned income one and maybe increase it a little bit. That way, you're not hurting those seniors. You're not hurting those people on whatever income that may not be taxed
So, Chris,
by
we
it.
did explore that. We spent a whole board meeting going down that road and converting from what we have to that earned income. It would actually be a significant increase because you're losing a portion of
Right.
that. So we did explore that. It's on YouTube, and we showed the numbers. So when you say that you have to get some income, that's levy. So as a superintendent, you're recommending a levy, and you need to be fired. I've had it.
Go ahead, Dan. Dan, you want to say something? Go ahead, Dan.
In the private sector, when we have budget shortfalls, we look at our largest cost centers and we make cuts. And oftentimes, the largest cost center is people, right? And that's just what Tom said. He says that's the largest cost center at the Perrysburg School District. So you don't get out of this without firing people. You just don't. Because in the private sector, oh yeah, it's bottom 20%, cut them off, done.
Right.
And yeah, there's going to be caps on expenses. There's going to be real close budget evaluations to follow, but you're going to take the axe to your biggest cost center.
You're taking
right away.
54 people. They're saying, "Hey, your only thing you've done wrong is to teach my kids," and that sucks, Chris. That sucks.
So you're, hey, I'm offering the suggestions of saying, hey, let's work together. Let's come to a solution that's reining in this growth here, so we can keep the same resources available to the students, and we're not firing or laying people off. And then we can show, hey, let's get a real plan together. I've seen, in your PowerPoint presentation, you list all the things that we've made improvements on for cost savings, but do we have the full breakdown? Here's what the cost was before, here's what the saving did, and here's where we're at. I think that's what a lot of people are saying, because they say, well, we want to see cost cuts, and you say we're doing it, and they're like, where? And you say, well, we're below the average, but that's not really directing it to them.
Let me ask you this, Tom. People like Chris and there's a Tracy that's online, and the no side feels like they have been disrespected. They feel like they have been disrespected. How are you? Let's say whether the levy passes or not. How do you bridge that gap? You're the guy in charge. Like it's how do you bridge that gap to make them feel at least heard?
Yeah, I think that that's something that we always strive to do. So the first part is setting up opportunities for dialogue, and something that we've been doing and consistently doing has been setting up listening tours, giving people an opportunity to weigh in through a variety of different ways, and going out and trying to engage staff and being on programs like this or your radio show or anywhere else, and being invited in to talk and to explain and to give that information. So I think that's the first part of it is trying to make sure that we get into listening and understanding where they are. The other thing too is school finance is complicated. I mean, this doesn't even scratch the surface in terms of, you know, how it's operated. And, you know, the private sector, I've got laws with timelines that tell me how I have to evaluate my staff. And that's something that doesn't exist in private sector. But when you say, like, you look at the law and say, okay, it's a stack, you know, like these are the things that you need to do. We're one of the most regulated industries there are. From the minute students get picked up at the bus, you know, the regulations that we have to endure to the time they log off on their computer at midnight. Everything in between there is something that we have to comply with and regulate, whether it's the food or what they're viewing or whatever. And so I think part of that is you know, having a conversation explaining what we do and why we have to do it the way that we do. The way that we pay teachers is part of the Ohio Revised Code. You know, so you know, why don't we just pay teachers a single salary? Why don't we ask developers to pay money when they come into a community and give it to the schools? Because the laws say that these things have to be this way and those things can't happen. The fact that we have a development office and we're raising private funds and we were a leader in the state in that capacity is another example of us, you know, doing something different to try to keep our costs down. And now we have districts across Ohio, and here in Northwest Ohio, you've got, you know, Sylvania and Ottawa Hills, Washington Local, Oregon, Maumee, all have foundations and development directors because we stepped out first to do that. So we're willing to try to do those different kinds of things. And so I think that educational piece is really important. The other thing is, I know we've spent maybe an hour or so, and I got a group of students at.
I know
that
we're having. I know.
But let me.
I gotta go get dinner.
Yeah. So, but let me just say this: is we've spent over an hour talking about numbers, and we have a school treasurer, and I wish he would have been invited because he is the numbers person, and certainly I'm very responsible and understand the numbers. But the one thing I haven't heard enough of is a discussion about the students. A discussion about what kinds of success that our students have, the value and investment that people are making in Perrysburg in the schools, and the return that they're getting, you know, from these schools. And the student's perspective is often absent in these conversations. I mean, we began with, you know, looking at, you know, peer groups versus local groups versus, you know, for the third grader that's walking the school hallways. You know, what is it that they need to have to be successful today and tomorrow? And we do an outstanding job of doing that. And we do it either at the state level if you have these undetermined weights,
or below,
or
at
below.
or below.
And you know, so again, you know, the fact is, you know, we're adding to our family, and when the kids are in our family, they are doing wonderful things that make Perrysburg so desirable. So when your 6 kids leave someday, I don't know if you'll still be alive, Chris, but when your 6 kids leave, you know, and you want to sell your home, people are driving up. We had a gentleman that was registering his family who was working in Marathon, and this is the place where they needed to be. And you know, you hear that time and time again, and that means that home is going to be desirable. This levy is an investment in your home values, because if we start to dismantle the schools, people are going to drive past this exit and they're going to go to other communities, and your home values are going to fall. And that $4.20 a month per $100,000, you're going to need to save a lot of those to make up a $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 change in home values. And I think that's an important thing, is we need to keep, you know, the finances are important, we can talk about, but we also are talking about a direct impact to students and their experiences.
Dan,
and Chris, I don't know if your kids go to Perrysburg or not.
They do. Yeah.
Yep.
Everyone here
you
lives
know,
in Perrysburg. Before we wrap up, we want to
Yep.
wrap up real quick. Go
Yep.
ahead, Dan.
You know, I think there's a chart circulating that breaks down the percentage of people's property tax and what that goes to, and obviously
Yeah.
Perrysburg schools being the largest
Right,
by far,
right.
And what people don't forget is there's 5,000 students in your district, 5,500, I think, somewhere around
So,
there.
yeah,
And
yeah.
really, I mean, there are Fortune 500 companies with fewer employees, right? So it is kind of like running our own Fortune 500 right here in Perrysburg, and each one of those students represents a gross domestic product that is produced. So if you really want to distill people down to numbers, right, each graduating class, I think, comes out, if you do the math, comes out to like $1.5 billion in economic opportunity created nationwide.
And I like pie. So, and I haven't
like
had
pie.
dinner, but the Ohio School Board Association, the LSC, the Legislative Service Commission, which is a bipartisan research arm of the state legislature, the average amount of local taxes that go to your local public schools between 60 and 70%. So the fact that you're saying 70%, 69%, depending on what township you live in, and that number varies. That's the average. So that isn't like you're doing something wrong in Perrysburg. And I know people are circulating that. It's like, oh, look, this much. Did anyone ever stop and say, well, what is the average? And that's it. I mean, that's what public schools are set up to. That in 1840s, when they set up public schools, they set up a local property tax. You need to dig up, Atwater in his grave down in Columbus and say, this is all your fault. But that pie that's the average. I mean, that's not that's
Right.
That's what it is.
The number is the number.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
all right. Well, I got to say thank you so much. First, Chris, I want to thank you, Chris Heathcott. Thank you so for coming in and I think a conversation back and forth as opposed to a Facebook post versus another Facebook post versus another Facebook post. Hopefully, this was a little bit more constructive, and hopefully, you feel that you were heard, Chris, because you're on you're the minority on the other side. So I hope you felt that you were fairly treated tonight. Dan, thank you for coming in as well, and of course Tom for sitting here for an hour and a half and just having a conversation. Hopefully some good came out of it, and I appreciate you taking your time as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, gentlemen, appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
guys. All
Thanks,
right,
Tom.
we'll see you guys later, and make sure no matter how you vote, make sure you vote next Tuesday.
Yes,
Thanks,
please
everybody.
vote.
Yes, everybody.